Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lucrezia Manieri. I'm a postdoc here at Politecnico di Milano. And I'm honored to be here today to present you my PhD research, which addresses control of large-scale systems by means of multi-agent reformulation and decentralized optimization. This work was mainly motivated by the challenges posed by optimal operation of these systems, that not only is due to their size, of course, but also to the presence of both components that are physical and digital, and needs to be coordinated to achieve a certain goal, and also the presence of uncertainty that may be affecting the system description. In many cases, this kind of systems can be described as mixed logical dynamical systems, so that if we use a linear performance index to evaluate their performance, we can cast their optimal operation into a mixed integer linear program, where the presence of continuous and discrete variables reflects the heterogeneity of the system, whereas the matrices A, B, and C may be uncertain. Now, despite their linearities, don't be fooled, these problems may be very difficult to handle because they have a combinatorial complexity that grows exponentially, hence, in the number of discrete variables. For this reason, in my PhD thesis, I proposed an optimization framework which comprises three elements. First, a decomposition strategy that aims at reducing the complexity of the original problem. Some efficient resolution schemes that may take advantage of the decomposition to sacrifice optimality for the sake of tractability and compute a solution which is feasible. And finally, database approaches to provide some feasibility guarantees in the presence of uncertainty, so when we're dealing with an uncertain problem. Now, today we'll take a look at all these three steps, but for now we'll start by focusing on the decomposition strategy. The idea behind it is simple. If we have a system that is a multi-agent system, this structure reflects on the optimization problem, which becomes structured as well. Here, for example, we have M agents that are minimizing the sum of their costs, while accounting for local constraints, there are individual limitations, and coupling constraints, there are global decisions that couple their decisions. So if we know the structure and if we do the correct modeling choices, this reflects into a structured constraint matrix, where the blocks on the diagonal model the local constraints, the horizontal border models the coupling constraints, whereas the vertical border models shared variables among the agents. However, if we do not make the correct modeling choices, this structure may be hidden, but could be recovered by permuting the rows and columns of the matrix. What I'm proposing in my PhD thesis with this decomposition strategy is a way to automatically achieve this permutation and find it by means of the graph representation of the original constraint matrix. Here, I'll give you just an intuition of how it works, just to stay high level. So if we start by this constraint matrix, we can construct its graph representation, where each node coincides with a column of the matrix. Then we can create edges, so connections between the nodes based on the connections created between the columns by the constraints, so the rows of the matrix. And now, since the matrix, remember, has a hidden structure, the hidden decomposition also translates into a hidden partition of the nodes of the graph. So that if we interpret the edges between the nodes as the probability of moving from a node to another when we're doing a random walk, and if we initialize the probability mass in a node, let's say B11 in this case, the mass will first spread among the nodes in the same group and then travel across different parts. So we can use this idea to simultaneously initialize these diffusions in each node of the graph and then see how these evolutions look. Then we can cluster nodes based on how similar these evolutions are. If we do this with this matrix, this is the partition of the nodes we obtain, and this is the permutation of the rows and the columns of the matrix that we're able to recover. So as you can see, we obtained the block-angular structure that I showed you before with the blocks and the borders. Now that we have this structure here that I showed you, we can leverage the structure to simplify computation. And use ad hoc resolution schemes. In my PhD thesis, I present two algorithms that are based on this idea. Basically, they are decentralized iterative resolution schemes that use Lagrangian relaxation to lift the coupling constraints, so they're dualized, they're no longer explicitly enforced in the problem. but then introduce a fictitious tightening of the shared resource, which is usually the one constrained by the coupling constraints, to enforce feasibility of the constraints that we have dualized, and so we have somehow forgotten. Now, of course, there are several ways to choose this fictitious tightening raw to ensure satisfaction of the constraints, but intuitively, the more tightening we have, the lower will be the performance of the solution because we'll be more conservative. So what we're going to do is try to keep this as small as possible. In the literature, of course, there are several algorithms that aim to update this tightening. One of them updates it a priori based on all the admissible solutions of the problems, which, as you may guess, it's a pretty conservative way of updating this tightening. A later update of the technique proposed an adaptive update strategy, which instead of considering all the feasible solutions, considers only the ones explored by the resolution scheme iteratively. The one we're proposing in my thesis is a similar approach, but that consider again an adaptive update of the tightening, but considers only the current solution. The update and the strategy you obtain is less conservative than the other in the literature and works pretty well on the examples we considered. However, since the tightening does not have a monotone evolution across the iterations, we were not able to provide convergence guarantees to a feasible solution. For this reason, we proposed another resolution scheme, which instead is still less conservative than the others in the literature, but applies an integral update. So we're able to recover convergence properties and guarantee convergence to a feasible solution. Now that we know how to solve this kind of problem, we can move to the case in which the instance is affected by uncertainty. In particular, this is the same problem we've seen before. For this part of the presentation, we'll consider those instances where the local constraints are affected by uncertainty. So they depend on an uncertain parameter delta. Now, since the parameter delta is not known at decision time because it's uncertain, and we may not know its probability distribution or the set where it lies, we may not be able to solve this problem because we have no data to actually implement and find a solution. What we may do to, let's say, to recover from this situation is embed data which are realizations of the uncertainty into the formulation of the problem, so that now we have a data-based multi-agent problem which is deterministic because we have extracted the realization. So now we know everything of the problem and we can compute a solution. Now the question is, what can we say about this solution? So can we characterize its generalization properties with respect to unseen realizations of the uncertainty? The answer is yes. The answer, of course, has been given by the scenario theory. And the generalization properties of the solutions are linked to the number of samples we extract. Also intuitively, the more samples we have, the more appropriate will be this description. So the problem is now how to characterize, how to compute a bound on this number of samples. And what we did with my PhD thesis is to provide some feasibility guarantees, some bounds on the number of samples we have to collect that are local. So those bounds are not for the entire problem, but are for each agent. So each agent has to collect a given number of samples. And this bound grows with the complexity of the local feasibility sets, so the constraints that were in blue at the beginning of the presentation. And of course, similarly to other bounds of this type, has tunable confidence and feasibility parameters, those epsilon and beta there. Now, how does it compare with respect to other approaches in the literature that do the same? Basically, there exist some other approaches that provide those type of guarantees, but they usually, for mixed integer linear programs, this is the catch. However, they usually are able to give these guarantees for optimal solutions. So we have to be able to compute this optimal solution to provide them. But that is usually not the case for mixed integer program because we have a combinatorial complexity. So we have to, let's say, accept to have a suboptimal solution which is only feasible. So in my PhD thesis, the guarantees we proposed hold also for suboptimal solutions. There are, of course, in the literature other approaches that do the same. However, they usually require agents to share their data sets. However, in the guarantees we're proposing, those data can be instead private, so agents may not be asked to share data that they want to preserve and keep hidden from the others. So, to sum up, my PhD thesis proposed an optimization framework which includes the composition strategies to disclose a hidden multi-agent structure and decompose the problem in smaller, although coupled sub-problems. Resolution schemes that are able to exploit this structure to parallelize computation, depict computational intractability, and provide solutions that are good quality and, of course, feasible. And finally, database guarantees that hold for suboptimal solutions of mixed integer linear programs and also are able to preserve the privacy of local information. The approach has been tested on several applications from the energy field, starting from provisions of ancillary services to the grid, supervisions of plants of photovoltaic panels by means of unmanned aerial vehicles, so quadcopters, and finally, the computation of the optimal charging schedule for a fleet of electric vehicles. And yeah, that's an overview. This is a list of the publications and the works I mentioned and that were relevant for my work. And that's all for me. I'd like to thank my supervisor, Professor Maria Prandini, and my co-supervisor, Professor Alessandro Falsone, who supported me throughout this journey. And thank you all for listening. Yeah, that's all. Thanks. Any feedback, questions are more than welcome.